back to my channel, or welcome if this is the first time you are joining me. As you can probably see from the title, today I am going to be doing a VR to Ladyknight of Avalon, who started a tag called Shopping for Tarot. I know there's a lot of people who have done this now, and I haven't had a chance to watch any of the videos yet, because as normal I like to do my own first, but I've got a lot sat in my list ready to watch when I've done my own. There are 10 questions and it's all about tarot decks, buying tarot decks, as the title probably suggests. So I'm going to crack straight on with the first question, which is, what was the last deck you bought and why that one? So the last deck I bought, I don't actually have in my possession because it doesn't actually come out yet. It's due to come out any time, I think, but I don't know exact dates. But I bought a copy of This Might Hurt Tarot from Little Red Tarot. So it's all paid for, all pre-ordered, I'm just waiting for it to come. And that was one that I've been waiting for a very long time. I mentioned in another VR that that was the one deck that I was like wishing to get my hands on. It's one that I especially put money aside for so that I could buy it as soon as it was available. I just love the art style. I love the aesthetic. I love the diversity in that deck. I love, you know, that kind of almost comic booky style art. I'm just really, really excited to receive that deck. So it's just one that I really wanted. There's no like deep and meaningful reason as to why it was that one particularly. That was just the one that was on top of my list that I really wanted to own. Question number 2, what's your decision process when you buy a new deck? It's really not a process as such. It's really, I mean, saying that I have a decision process makes it sound like it's a conscious thing, and it really isn't. For me, I mean, there are things that I do. So when I hear about a deck that I think I might like to own, I tend to, if it's a deck that's already out, I tend to have a look at least 1 or 2 walkthroughs on YouTube so that I can see all of the cards to see whether I like it. Financial considerations are a huge part of my decision process because, you know, I live alone and I have only a set amount of disposable income to spend on decks, so I have to be conscious of how much I'm spending, and so that whether or not I think it's financially worthwhile is a consideration in my decision process. But the major thing for me is, do I like the aesthetics? Ultimately, is it a style of art that I like, I can see myself connecting with, and that I want to work with? It's not really any more complicated than that. Question number 3, what are deal breakers in a deck that keep you from buying it? I suppose deal breakers to me are specific cards. So there are, you know, I'm very particular about how I like certain cards in the Suit of Swords to be depicted. I'm very particular about how I like strength to be depicted. The Hierophant is another one that I look at because I don't always like that card. So I like to see how they've chosen to depict that particular image and see whether it's one that I like, or whether it's one, you know, if it's one that challenges me, that's not a deal breaker, but if it's one that completely shuts me off, then that can be a deal breaker. So it's mainly that. Sometimes some things that I sometimes take into consideration, as I say, is cost. If it's the problem with a lot of indie decks, for example, that are sold through Kickstarter or Indiegogo or through Etsy or whatever, a lot of the time the cost is a deal breaker, because you have to, a lot of them come from the US and I'm obviously not in the US, so then you have to take into consideration postal costs, so, and also the fact that you're probably going to get hit with custom charges. So it's sitting down and working out in total how much that deck is going to cost, and then I have to make a decision on whether I think that deck is worth that amount of money. And there isn't really a prescribed process for how much I'm willing to spend. It's more of that particular deck, how drawn am I to that deck, how desperately do I want that deck in my collection, how different is that deck from anything else that I own. I suppose this is part of my decision process as well. This probably should have been my answer to question 2, really. But there we go. But so yeah, there's not a huge amount of deal breakers for me, but the deal breakers tend to be deck specific rather than as a whole, if that makes sense. So it tends to be an individual deck by deck thing rather than I won't buy any decks that have this, or I won't buy any decks that do that. It's not really that specific for me. Question number 4, little white book or big guidebook? Well, this has recently changed me. I think even so much as a week ago, I probably would have said neither. I'm not really bothered. I don't really pay that much attention to the guidebook as such. Now I would say that I would prefer a big guidebook. And the reason for that is because I have started to include reading the guidebook as part of my getting to know and like breaking in a new deck. And so I want something really meaty to dig my teeth into. Little white books generally tend to be just keywords, and I'm not really fussed about keywords because the keywords are the keywords, right? So if it's going to include a guidebook, I would rather it was a proper guidebook. But if it comes with a little white book, I'm not too bothered. I just know that I definitely won't read or probably even keep the little white book. Question number 5. Do you have new deck rituals? How do you break in a new deck? I don't really have any rituals as such. Like, there isn't a specific set of things that I do every time I break in a new deck, which, you know, would be a ritual. But I work with, one of the things that I like to do with a new deck is a video of a walkthrough and a flip through of the deck, because that gives me a chance to really focus on that deck and go through each card and really look at them, because I'm going through the cards anyway in order to make the video. I work with a new deck for a whole month is part of my process. So I will do all of my daily draws with that deck. I will do all of my readings for that month with that deck. If I read for another person during that month, I would do it with that deck. I specifically work with only one deck per month, and none of my others really get touched in that month. If I did Instagram challenges, I would use that deck. So I break in a new deck by just really using it consistently for an entire month. Question number 6. Have you ever been disappointed after getting a deck because it looked different than expected? I don't think I have, actually. I don't think I've ever received a deck, opened it and gone, oh, this is not what I wanted. This is not what I thought it was going to be. There's been decks that maybe I've opened them and I haven't had that immediate connection to the artwork that I was expecting. The Wise Dog Tarot was a bit like that. The Cute and Creepy Tarot was a bit like that. It was like there wasn't that immediate, I love this deck, I'm so glad I got it, this is going to be amazing type connection that I was expecting. But I don't think I've ever got a deck, opened it and been disappointed with it, because normally when I get a deck, I know what I'm getting, I know what to expect, because I've already seen that, unless it's a deck like the Wise Dog Tarot where I've only seen certain images because the deck was still in creation. Generally, I know what I'm getting before the deck arrives, so I know what to expect before I open it. Normally, if a deck disappoints me, it's because once I've worked with it, I don't get what I expected. So I bought Tarot from the Hidden Realm. Is that the right title? Tarot from the Hidden Realm? I don't know. You know the one I mean, by Julia Jeffries. And I love the artwork. I think the artwork is stunning. But when I worked with the deck, I really struggled. I really found it difficult to work with and connect with that deck. So I was disappointed that it didn't turn out the way that I wanted it to. The Gill Tarot is another example. I thought the artwork, particularly of the majors, was absolutely beautiful. It was a deck that people raved about, so there was probably a bit of FOMO and getting caught up in that excitement when it got re-released in there for me when I bought it. But even when I did my walkthrough of it and, you know, flipped through the deck, I really liked it. I really loved the imagery. But I only managed to work with that deck for 11 days before I was like, it just isn't working for me. It's too much of a struggle for me. It doesn't feel easy. And it's not challenging in a good way that's stretching me. It's challenging in a frustrating way that's just leaving me feeling like I don't know how to read tarot. So that was a little bit disappointing. So it's less so when a deck arrives, and it's less about the look and the feel when I see the deck for the first time. It's more how it feels when I actually start working with it that leaves me a bit disappointed, I think. Question number 7. Do you interview new decks? I do. Well, the very first thing I do with the deck at the beginning of the month is a deck interview. And I put it in my bullet journal to keep a record of it. And I do it for every single deck. And the deck interview that I use personally, I cannot remember where I found it. I think I found it on Pinterest. But it's a 6-card deck interview. Lots of people have probably seen this before. And it's please introduce yourself, your strengths as a deck, your limitations as a deck, what can I learn from you, what is the best way to work with you, and the outcome of our relationship. And I just find that this one really helps me connect almost immediately with a new deck. For me, deck interviews are really important. Now, I don't believe, personally, that decks have their own... Like, I don't personify my decks. I don't work like that. So when I do a deck interview, it's less for me about, you know, when I, like, please introduce yourself and that kind of thing. It's less about the deck doing anything. It's more about me very quickly being able to get to grips with how I read that deck, because how I interpret those cards for that particular deck and how I connect with those particular images tells me a lot about my relationship with that deck and how it's going to develop and how I'm going to feel using that deck. So it's not I don't believe that decks have personalities. I believe that I project certain things onto certain decks based on how I react to the imagery. So I'm not sure if that makes sense, but hopefully you know what I mean. Question number 8. Do you ever buy decks for a specific purpose and only using it for that one? No, I don't. No, I don't. I mean, I have decks, you know, once I've worked with them where I think, like the Deviant Moon, for example. Once I worked with the Deviant Moon, I thought, well, this deck, you know, it just feels like a deck that really readily lends itself to shadow work. And I have another deck that when I read with it, when I did the deck interview spread with it, most of the cards that came up were pentacles, which kind of suggested to me that this is a deck that's great for dealing with like real world material kind of issues, you know, like job things and house things and security type things. And then I get Mystical Manga deck. I think the deck interview with that was a lot of cups. So, you know, that kind of immediately built up this relationship with that deck that was very soft and very emotional and very light. And so it's but I wouldn't necessarily only use it for specific type of readings. It's just that I know what I get an understanding of what type of message it's going to give me in a particular reading. I really don't know if I'm making any sense whatsoever. It's not something I've really tried to verbalize before, so I don't. Hopefully that makes sense. I don't know, I said that for the last one as well, but I've not tried to verbalize these before, so I'm not really sure how to say what I want to say. Anyway, we'll just move on. Question number 9. Do you differentiate between decks you buy for yourself and decks you use for other people? No, I don't. I mean, I don't really read for other people, so it's not really a factor at all in my deck decision buying. What? My what? My deck decision buying. My deck buying decision would be actual English. Words are hard today. Stringing sentences together are apparently hard today. So no, anyway, I don't tend to differentiate, no, because I never buy a deck. Reading for other people is never something that's in my mind when I buy a deck. It's always about me. me, how it's going to read for me, and how I'm going to connect with it, and the type of readings it's going to give me. So yeah, my deck buying decision is all based around me. And question number 10, what is one thing that you wish deck creators would do more of or stop doing? I don't think there's anything particularly aesthetically in terms of the artwork that I would prefer they do more of or stop doing. And, you know, things like borders and that kind of stuff, I'm not really overly fussed about. I'm quite happy to work with a deck with borders, and I'm quite happy to work with decks without borders. My personal preference, Jesus. Don't know what is wrong with me today. I think I'm hungry and I need to eat, and it's affecting my brain. My personal preference is for decks to not have borders, but if I really like the artwork on a deck, then I don't have a problem with taking the borders off if needs be. The one thing that does frustrate me, particularly with Llewellyn decks, but not only with Llewellyn decks, is when you get these really nice big boxes, you know, the flat boxes that are lovely, and they come and you think, oh, they're really beautiful, but actually they take up too much space and you end up buying bags and stop using the boxes or whatever. And so they've spent all this money on the packaging and the cardstock is terrible. I would rather, and it's not even deck creators, it's more deck publishers, but I would rather that deck publishers spent their money on cardstock than packaging, because I'm not going to use the packaging for anything other than storing the deck in. The deck is the important bit. And even again, going back to the guidebook thing, I would, if I got a really fancy, really well put together, really decent guidebook, but the cardstock was shit, that would frustrate me. I would rather ultimately that the majority of the money in deck creation went into making decent, hard-wearing, usable cards with decent cardstock than anything else. Everything else is just packaging. It's the cards ultimately that I care about. So it's not really a deck creator thing, it's more of a deck producer thing, which sometimes, you know, in the case of indie decks is the same person, but yeah, put more money into cardstock and less money into packaging, please. That would be lovely. So that's all 10 questions. I don't know what I was going to say then, so I will just say thank you very much for joining me. Sorry about the scattiness of my brain today, but I hope you will come back and join me for another one soon. Take care, everyone, and lots of love. Bye bye.